Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Task Force, JTF. My name is Chaim ben Pesach. I am now applying once again to make Aliyah, which means to immigrate to the land of Israel. When a Jew wants to immigrate to the land of Israel, it's called in Hebrew making Aliyah. First, a little background on what happened in my case. I was the national chairman of the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, of Gedol Dorenu Harav Meir Kahana Zecher Tzadik Livracha Hashem Yikom Damo. Rabbi Kahana, may God avenge his blood. May the memory of this saint be immortalized. I was the national chairman of his organization during the 1980s, during the peak of the historic international campaign that we led to liberate over 1 million Jews who were held hostage behind an iron curtain of oppression and injustice. Over 1 million Soviet Jews that were being held behind the Soviet Iron Curtain. We liberated them. We led a campaign to free them. But that campaign included bombing empty buildings. We did not injure anybody. We didn't intend to injure anybody. But we did do property damage to Soviet diplomatic property. The buildings were empty that we bombed. We did that in order to put the issue on page 1 of newspapers all over the world, which we succeeded in doing, to put it on the front burner of Soviet-American relations, which we succeeded in doing, and to create a situation in which it would be the #1 story on television, on radio, throughout the world. And that did happen when we did those bombings. But again, we didn't injure anybody. We didn't intend to injure anybody. And it's important to remember that, because I'm going to bring up something in a moment that you'll see a terrible injustice that has been done here. We did damage Soviet diplomatic property in order to free over 1 million Russian Jews. And in addition to bombing empty buildings, we also blew up Soviet diplomatic cars. At 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the cars were parked in the Soviet parking lots. We did not injure anybody in those bombings either. There was no one in the cars. But we did blow up and destroy their cars, again, to highlight the issue of the terrible persecution, torture, and oppression of over 1 million Russian Jews that were being held hostage in violation of international law, by the way, in violation of every agreement and international protocol. You are not allowed to hold people against their will, and the Soviets did this illegally, brutally, sadistically, in a Nazi-like manner, from the time of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution until the mid-1980s. We changed that situation with the campaign that we led to free Soviet Jews. And I was the national chairman of the JDL when we did it, and I personally was responsible for placing those bombs against Soviet diplomatic targets to destroy Soviet diplomatic property. In addition to that, we tear-gassed the Soviet ballet at Lincoln Center, the Soviet Mosaiev Ballet, on September 2nd, 1986, which was the most famous incident in the struggle to free Soviet Jewry and the most famous incident in the history of the Kahanist movement and in the history of the Jewish Defense League. Because in that incident, both Soviet ambassadors, the Soviet ambassador to the United States in Washington and the Soviet ambassador to the UN in New York, both Soviet ambassadors were in Lincoln Center for that ballet performance. Both of them were injured. Both of them were overcome by the tear gas. We released a tear gas canister in the audience. And in addition to that, 50 Soviet performers and diplomats were overcome by the tear gas. It wasn't a serious injury, but they had to be hospitalized overnight after inhaling the tear gas. And the reason that happened is because they refused to listen to the FBI, which told them to evacuate Lincoln Center when the tear gas canister was released. Now that's the background on the excuse that the Israeli government has used, or one of the excuses, to keep me out of Israel. The fact that I did this to free Soviet Jews. That's the background. Now, in addition to that, they say that I'm a member of the Kahanist movement, and a member of the Kahanist movement, which favors a program to encourage the Arabs to leave the land of Israel, should not be allowed to make Aliyah, should not be allowed to move to Israel. This is the same Israeli Bolshevik government that allowed the Arab Hitler Yasser Arafat and over 80,000 Arab Muslim Nazi terrorist mass murderers, not only allowed them to come into the land of Israel, the Israeli governments, one after another, invited them into Israel. Invited them. Armed, murderous, terrorist Nazis who promised to exterminate the Jewish people, whose official policy of the PLO and Fatah, the terrorist gangs that they're members of, they openly, officially say that their goal is to destroy Israel and exterminate the entire Jewish people. They also promise to exterminate all non-Muslim infidels. And the Israeli government under the Oslo surrender agreements, invited these mass murderers into Israel. And at the same time that the Israeli government invited 80,000 Arab Muslim Nazi terrorist mass murderers, including the Arab Hitler Yasser Arafat, into the land of Israel. Mass murderers who were responsible for murdering thousands of innocent Jewish men, women, and children. At the same time that the Israeli government invited them in, and at the same time that the Israeli government armed them, trained them, gave them billions of dollars, gave them land, and is planning to give them, God forbid, an independent state in the heartland of biblical Israel, with Jerusalem as its capital, God forbid, if we don't prevent it. At the same time that the Israeli government did all of this on behalf of these mass murdering beasts who murdered children, women, babies, at the same time the Israeli government invited them in, they threw me out of Israel. I cannot go to Israel because I damaged property. All I did is damage the property of Soviet Nazi oppressors who were torturing, oppressing, and even murdering Soviet Jews. All I did is damage their property in order to save our people. And I am banned from going to the land of Israel for 11 years now. It was over 11 years ago that I was banned. In July 1996, when I tried to go, I flew to Israel. The minute I got to the airport, I was thrown out of Israel. The Shabak, which is the Israeli KGB, surrounded me, arrested me, and put me in a cell with no toilet, with no food, with nothing, for 24 hours, and then forcibly threw me out of my homeland. And the same Israeli government that did this to me, at the same time they were doing this to me, they were meeting, and the interior minister who signed my expulsion order met with the PLO terrorists and with Arafat at the same time that he was expelling me from Israel. I'm expelled for fighting to save Soviet Jews by damaging Soviet diplomatic property, but Arab Muslim Nazi terrorist mass murderers who murdered thousands of innocent Jewish men, women, and children, who also, by the way, murdered hundreds of innocent Americans, these vicious terrorist Muslim Nazi mass murderers are invited into Israel. And so this grotesque injustice, this sick, self-hating, anti-Semitic policy of the Israeli government is what we are trying to overturn now. And so we are going to be appealing to the Interior Minister, who is a leftist, but we are going to be urging him to change his policy. We're going to explain in another video what our strategy is, because he's a leftist. Obviously, he's a Jewish leftist. Jewish leftists don't like Chaim ben Pesach. But you know something? I don't care if someone's a leftist or what he is. Even a self-hating Jewish leftist has to admit that this is a grotesque miscarriage of justice. That this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. That I am banned from going to Israel while Arafat and 80,000 Muslim Nazi terrorist mass murderers are welcome. This is unbelievable. But this is what happened. Now, if the Interior Minister rejects our appeal to let me in, because we're going to make an appeal, and I have a very famous attorney, Yoram Sheftel, who's one of the best attorneys in Israel. He's going to be writing to the Interior Minister, and he's going to be making an appeal. If that's rejected, we're going to be going to the Israeli Supreme Court, which is the only thing you can do in Israel when a cabinet minister like the Interior Minister rejects an appeal. The only recourse you have is to appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court, which is also an extreme left court. The judges there are extreme leftists. But this is something that defies all logic, all common sense, all decency, all morality. And so we are going to try to overturn these decisions. Now, we have a program on our forum. If you go to our forum, you have here the address of our website, and here is the address of our great forum. If you go to our forum, we are writing to members of the Knesset of the Israeli Parliament to try to get them to intervene in this case, and we're going to be doing other things to intervene. If you join our forum, you'll see what we're trying to do to overturn this horrific decision. Remember, these are politicians in Israel. If they see that the people won't accept this injustice, these are politicians who want to survive politically. So it is possible to overturn this. If all of our people really work hard and cooperate to overturn this, we can overturn this. Our people in Israel, our movement in Israel, Hayamin Hamiti, and our movement in America, the Jewish Task Force, are going to be working on this, are going to be trying to gather support in order to change this injustice. This is an injustice that must be rectified. This is something that must be changed. And with your help, God willing, we can do it. Shalom.